Right, well this is really just to give you a sort of picture of what we've managed to get going or achieve since our last meeting when we presented what we were doing and where we hope to go with it. So one of the things that we spoke about, I think, at the last meeting, but actually physically we had our inaugural meeting in January. It was actually booked for January the 13th. Was to establish we've always had clinicians who are specialists in GIST who have advised us, but we've never had a formal medical advisory board. And it was thought we ought to have one because obviously now we've got the National GIST Tissue Bank. As we build up a store of tissue that's available for research, at some point we will expect to have researchers requesting access to those samples. And we, GIST Support UK, aren't in a position to determine if those requests are valid, whether the research is a duplication of something already happening in the world, you know, whether it's a worthy request to use that tissue. It's a very rare commodity, so we have to be very careful about who is using it and for what purpose, and that it is going to progress research for GIST. So as a result, we approached the various specialists and asked if they would be willing to form a medical advisory board for GIST, and all of these doctors here have agreed. So Professor Judson is the chair, but we've got Dr. Belusu, Professor Hall, Dr. Leahy, Professor Wall, Dr. Newton Wong, and Dr. Philippe Tanier. And obviously we would welcome others who would like to join that team. We had our first meeting in January on the 13th, and we had an agenda for that meeting, but it kind of got thrown awry, because on the 12th was when it was announced that the proposal was to remove regorafenib from the Cancer Drugs Fund. So much of the meeting was actually then diverted onto discussing what we were going to do about that. And one of the main actions, first of all, that came out of that was that GIST Support UK, in combination with our clinicians, would draft a press release to say basically how we wanted to oppose that decision, and that basically our patients need this drug, and we were objecting to it being removed. So on that subject, in terms of where we've come with this, where's Tori? We had a discussion about what we could do, because we've never really had or been put in a position where we needed to perhaps fight against something quite so determinedly. And the press release was a new thing. We started to end up sort of like thinking who in our network can help us with this type of thing, because obviously that's not something we've necessarily done before. And we managed to find some assistants. I've got a brother who's a publicity manager, and various other people said, oh, well, perhaps you could talk to them. And so we managed to get our press release out to lots of different publications. And then our listserv was the next thing, to basically ask for help, broadcast that need for help from patients. Please can you write to your MP? Please can you help us to raise our concerns about the prospect that this drug won't be available? And as a result of that call, obviously various patients wrote back saying they'd like to help. And patients and carers, and in amongst those was Tori James. I'd like to come round. And Tori basically wrote to me and said, I can see what you're trying to do. Would it be of any use to do an e-petition? And I said, yes, please. I don't know how to do one of those. Would you like me to set up an e-petition? Yes, please. So over to Tori. She set up the e-petition.
Hi, everyone. So first of all, I just really wanted to say thank you so much to everyone that signed and shared and tweeted the petition and pestered everyone you met on the train or the bus or whatever, like I did. And yeah, it's been a phenomenal response, and we really, really appreciate it. The work hasn't finished there. Obviously, the general elections get in the way of things, but once you know who your MP is going to be after the election, we ask if you could please write to your MP emphasising about our campaign. Obviously, I should really thank the 100,000 Voices campaign. We were helped by an advertising company called TMW. Richard Bassett, my partner, wave Richard. He's a GIST patient, and it's his brother, William, that works for TMW and came forward and said, we'll help, and they helped us create this 100,000 Voices campaign, which really allowed the petition to take off. So we really appreciate their support. But yeah, after the election, please write to your MPs, tell them about regorafenib, tell them why it's important, and let's get it back on the Cancer Drugs Fund. Really.
Thank you. So we've dug deep really with and discovered skills we didn't realise we had. But the photograph, basically we asked if there were any patients that would be willing to talk about their situation, their stories, patients who were on Sutent, patients who at some point will need regorafenib, and also patients who were currently on regorafenib. Some of the other patients in our group were able to facilitate, they had contacts with relatives who may have worked with the BBC or the local newspaper. And so we then had a need for patients who would be willing to be interviewed. So there's a selection there. That's obviously Victoria Rockingham, Gemma Peacock, that's my daughter Eve, Richard and Amy Stewart. It just so happens that all of those 5 are paediatric wild-type patients. But obviously, in addition to that, we had Tim Mason and Emma, where's she gone? There she is there, who all were happy to talk about their situation publicly. And it resulted in us having, I think, probably about 4 or 5 BBC interviews. I became a regular feature at our local Bristol one because they wanted somebody to talk from an official capacity, so to speak, and because most of the clinicians weren't available at the time they wanted to do the interview. They had me sat on a stool talking to people in Northampton, people down in Brighton, through a microphone that was coming into my ear. It was a really busy time and quite stressful at times, but totally amazing. We never ever imagined we would get to over 100,000 signatures, and there were times when there were like 7,000 signatures per hour. It was just crazy, but brilliant. The drug is still available in England, but it has gone to an appeal, and the Cancer Drugs Fund panel will be reviewing it again. Now, obviously, we're praying that they come to the conclusion that it should remain available, but obviously, we have to wait until that appeal. So, at the moment, the best thing is the fact that it's still available beyond the deadline, which was the 12th of March. So that's really good. In terms of regorafenib elsewhere, we were asked to provide the patient perspective for the Scottish review of regorafenib for GIST patients, and Tim and I went to Glasgow to participate in a review panel, and we were absolutely delighted with the outcome when they announced a couple of weeks ago that it is actually now available in Scotland. They have a slightly different process in Wales, but we have submitted a patient sort of perspective to the review, which is going to be happening in Wales, and obviously I think the outcome of that will be known sometime in May. So the only thing I don't know is about Northern Ireland at the moment, so that's a gap. I need to find out more about what happens there, but that's where we are with regorafenib. The next sort of activity in terms of what we talked about for the last 2 patient meetings was obviously our outreach program, which is to try and make sure that all the hospitals, all the nurses, all the doctors, all the specialists, and any patients are aware of the fact that there is material available for GIST patients, and to help them understand about how they can be assisted by a support group like ours and learn more about their condition. And I'd like to introduce Sue Russell. We obviously were asking for patients to help us deliver materials to hospitals, and it was only when we actually went up to a sarcoma meeting in Leicester that all of a sudden one of the patients who'd been in receipt of some of these materials suddenly came up and said, actually, I'd like 25 of this and 25 of that, please. I said, okay, well, what exactly are you doing with them? And she said, well, and then she described what she was doing with them, and it's a whole new ball game. So over to Sue Russell, who's taken sort of patient representation and delivery of materials to a different level.
Thank you. Actually, it started when I was sat in the audience at one of these meetings in Leeds, and Tim asked if people would volunteer to be a local rep, just to take literature to their local hospital, local area. And when I was diagnosed with GIST in 2011, I felt very frightened and isolated and alone. And until I found GIST Support UK, I was very lost. And this organisation was very important to me. So I thought, if I can get word out to another newly diagnosed patient, then that's got to be a good thing. So I said, yes, I'll do that. And I picked up a few leaflets on the way out. There is a table out there with leaflets you can collect on the way. Took them home, and I thought, well, I'll start with my GP. It's a big GP practice. And so I asked to speak to the practice manager and took samples of this literature that I'd picked up and said, could you, at your practice meeting, could you hand out this literature and make sure that the GPs are aware? And she was kind of polite, but less than enthusiastic, I think is what I would say. Well, yes, but the meetings are very busy. We'll see if we have time, and so on. So I thought, okay, this is not very promising. We maybe need a different tack. Having said that, subsequently, it was mentioned this morning that you could get a nominated GP. And so I went back to the practice, this is a couple of years later, or a year later, went back to speak to the practice manager and asked if I could have a nominated GP because I had GIST. And she said she would raise it at the practice meeting, and in fact one of the GPs volunteered to be my nominated GP, so somebody had read the literature somewhere, I think. But anyway, next time I went to the hospital, I went to the Macmillan Information Centre. I go to the hospital very regularly, every 4 weeks. And I dropped in and I asked to speak to the Information Centre manager, a gentleman called Richard Moody. And I explained what I was doing, and he was very enthusiastic. He said, yes, I do know about GIST, but I also know we have very little literature. So please, yes, can I have whatever literature you've got? So I gave the remainder of what I had to him. And I said, well, Richard, I'll email you every 3 or 4 months and just check, see whether you need any more, and I just keep them topped up. And Richard has asked me to take some more today, so I'm going to raid a little bit more literature today, okay? When I was talking to Richard, we talked about clinical nurse specialists. Now, you heard this morning how important a role that is. In Leicester, we don't have one. And I asked Richard, and he said, well, yes, this is a little bit of a gap. It is, officially, it's the upper GI nurse specialist that covers GIST, but she doesn't really have time. And so I said, okay, well, I think it's important. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask if I can have a meeting with Professor Anne Thomas, who's my consultant, to see whether we could perhaps talk about this. And he said, yes, that's a good idea. So that's what I did. I rang my consultant and said, could we just have a very short meeting to talk about GIST Support UK information and how we can get that to newly diagnosed patients? And she said, yes, of course we can. Arranged a meeting. Richard came to that meeting too, and we had a very useful discussion. Clinical nurse specialist, it's a workload issue at Leicester. They have taken that away. They're going to have a look at it. I still haven't got one at the moment. I don't know whether newly diagnosed patients do. But as a result of that meeting, Anne Thomas said, I actually work with GPs on an occasional basis doing lectures for GP training days they have, and I do lectures in rare cancers. Perhaps you would be able to get some information out there. I'll give you the contact name, Jade Atkin, and see whether you can do something. Richard said, well, I have contacts with Macmillan training people. Would you mind if I pass your name on there? I said, no, that's fine. So as a result of that, I contacted Jade Atkin. She produces a newsletter which goes out to all of the GPs in the Leicestershire and Rutland area, and she suggested I might like to write a short article about GIST Support UK, which I did, and that was published in the newsletter last November. So that got the word out to, well, if they read the newsletter anyway, all the GPs in the area. Around the same time, November, I had a request from the training coordinator for Macmillan nurses in Leicestershire. Richard had passed on my name, and they were holding an event in Leicester, because it's in the middle of the country, for all of the staff who staff the, they call them the buses, the mobile Macmillan information centres. And these are a range of different professions. It's doctors, nurses, radiographers, dietitians, all sorts of things. And they do sort of stints on manning the buses around the country. And they were having a training day in Leicester because it was accessible for wherever they lived. And it was 2 days on rare cancers. And they said, would I go along and talk to them about what it was like to be diagnosed as a GIST patient with a rare cancer? Yes, of course. How many people? Well, about 25 to 30. Hence the request for literature. So I happened to be going to the East Midlands Sarcoma Conference, which was very close to where I live, and Jane was there. And so I collected up vast amounts of literature so that I could do information packs of one of each of the items of literature that we have to take along to this Macmillan training day. The training day was in January, and I arrived a little early and sat in the back of the classroom to listen to this talk about some very rare form of pancreatic cancer, which was so unbelievably technical, I was horrified. And I thought, not really going to want to listen to me after this. But anyway, I told them about my experiences. There was another lady this morning who has had, I don't know where she is now, had an experience of breast cancer previously to being diagnosed with GIST. I think there might be a number of us, but I have that experience as well. And so I could draw on the differences between being diagnosed with a very common cancer, where there is an extensive support network when you're diagnosed with breast cancer. There are lots of people to provide you with help and advice on how to handle side effects from chemotherapy and all sorts of different things, and how different it is when you're diagnosed with GIST and you don't know anybody else who's suffering from the same complaint. You don't know where to turn for information or advice or help or support. And that's where GIST Support UK comes in. And I gave them their literature pack and explained how much more important I felt it was to give people who are diagnosed with rare cancers support over and above the people with the more common cancers where the information is readily available. That talk was very well received. I stayed on for another 15, 20 minutes afterwards just chatting to people, and they said it was invaluable to hear a patient's perspective because they seldom get the opportunity to do that as part of their training. So hopefully now, anybody getting onto a Macmillan Information Centre bus anywhere in the country saying, I've just been diagnosed with GIST, is now going to get some helpful and supportive information, and specifically contact details for GIST Support UK. So what started off as just a little thing sort of kind of snowballed and snowballed. So what I would say is pick up a bunch of leaflets on the way out, go home and just think where you might go, where you'll meet people who might also meet GIST patients or know GIST patients, and just talk to them. And you never know what might happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Well, as a result of obviously what Sue's been doing, we had another lady who approached us further to one of our other meetings. Her name's Sharon Bethel, and she lives down in Winchester. So I sent a summary that Sue wrote of what she'd been doing, and as a result of that, Sharon's now doing a similar sort of thing in the sort of Winchester and Southampton area, which is where obviously our next patient meeting is going to be anyway. So hopefully that will encourage a few patients in that area that we probably haven't approached before. One of the other patients who approached us when we were in Leicester, David and I were in Leicester, who'd also been to a few meetings before, is Emma Tennant. And so probably best if Emma come and tells you what she's managed to uncover for us, which obviously we weren't expecting, and it's pretty brilliant actually. So come and tell everyone.
Hello. So I work for a company called UK TV. We run 10 different television channels, including Dave and Yesterday and Gold and various other ones. We support a charity every year as a company, and generally what happens is we're asked to nominate charities close to the staff's heart, and you write a little bit about why you nominate that charity, and then it goes to the staff for a vote. We've got about 220 staff members. I hadn't fully come out about my cancer to everybody at work last year. I had to the immediate management team and my direct reports. But I decided, having gone from the first line drug to the last line drug in 6 months last year, that it was about time that I got active. And so, and decided that I wanted to put GIST forward, which did mean I had to sort of come out in front of the company, at least on email at first. And basically they voted for GIST UK to be the Charity of the Year this year. So we're doing lots of mad things this year to raise money. We, as well as baking all the time, because we're a company of feeders, and then selling our baking products back to the company constantly, we're doing something called UK TV Against the Elements this year. So we're trying to do some challenges that both, some of them are physical challenges and some of them are mentally challenging, so that people can, as many people as possible in the company can get involved and raise money. So we have a cycle from the Palace to Palace, so from Hampton Court to Versailles in June in 3 days. So it's about 100 miles a day. I'm driving a van. I'm not actually cycling. I'm driving one of the support vans, but I do have a naturally heavy right foot, so driving at 5 miles an hour for 3 days is going to be very challenging. We have a dragon boat race element happening in September, where there's a big event happening, and we're taking one of the dragon boats, and I think it's about 21-mile course under all the bridges through central London. It should take them about 3.5 hours. I'm not doing that either. But there are some less physical and more mental challenges. For the fire element, we're hoping to do a fire walk towards the end of the year. If there are places on that, I'll let you know. But the first event we're doing is 2 weeks today, on the 8th of May. I don't know if people remember from the Olympics. At the Olympic Park, there was a big structure built called the Orbit. It's a big red scaffolding type structure. It's 272 feet high. Apparently it's the highest freestanding structure you can abseil off. And we have it for the day on the 8th of May, and we are going to be throwing people off it. I'm not doing that either. I'm scared of heights. But our chairman, Nick, has volunteered to do it. He didn't quite say he would, but he said, I'll be there, and if there happens to be a place. Guess what? There's a place.
I'm not. Yeah, I am. Yeah.
But I'm also, there are other places. We have about 30 places free to do this. I have information about it. If anybody fancies abseiling 272 feet off the Orbit in 2 weeks' time, we will pay the fee to do it, which is £80, as long as anybody says that they can raise at least £80 in sponsorship. I have all the information. If you or any of your friends or relatives fancy getting involved to raise money for GIST UK, then please do let me know. I will post information on the listserv website as well.
Just one point. If you don't fancy doing it, is anybody that doesn't fancy doing it, put your hands up? Oh, you chickens. You're very welcome to sponsor me as an alternative to that. In fact, I'm going to leave a piece of paper right at the front with Nick's Mad Day in the Olympic Park. It's not an official sponsor form, but it's as good as I can do, on the basis that she only told me today that I was doing it. And yeah, apparently we can use the interweb machine to do things like this as well. But either way, I'll name, address, and the amount you'd like to sponsor me, it'll be out the front. Thank you very much.
And we have a Virgin Money giving page for the UK TV Against the Elements activity all year. So we can post that up as well, so everybody can give to that site throughout the year, or you could tell friends and relatives to give to that site. It'll all help with the with the fundraising. Other things we're doing, apart from obviously more baking, we'll do quizzes, both internal, and we're planning a big external quiz with other media companies. We're planning to try maybe a choir off. We have a choir at UKTV, and we want to challenge some other industry choirs. These will all, and we're having a favours auction as well. Probably after a quiz, what we tend to do is get people drunk during the quiz and then get them to bid on favours, and that tends to, we raised £8,000 2 years ago in one night doing that. And the other things we're doing for GIST UK is we're just putting in into our Innovation Investment Committee proposal to get some money invested to create 2 videos for GIST UK. One similar to one we did for the charity last year, which is a sort of public-facing, promotional, awareness-raising video that can be used, sent out to people to help with fundraising and awareness. And another one is more of an educational thing that could be sent round to medical professionals. We're hopefully going to produce 2 of those. We've also got somebody helping redesign the website, and anything else that you think we might have the expertise to help with, please let me know, because we're here to support GIST every way we can this year. So people internally in marketing, in press, in web, in any area, in production, are all happy to help GIST this year, because it's the charity we've all committed to.
Thank you. In the first instance, any funds that are raised, the first batch of funds that are raised from this whole process with UKTV, we're earmarking it for the tissue bank, really, because we need to support the development of the tissue bank and the running of the tissue bank, and that's key, really, to getting research going. So that's where the first part of the funds that are raised are going to go. On the other front, obviously, I think up until now, Tim has obviously mentioned on the previous 2 meetings about our need for assistance in taking literature to hospitals, etc. Tim's actually not particularly well at the moment, so Nicola Wardle, where's Nicola? Over there, that lady over there, she's stepped into the breach, and so if you want to register your name as somebody who'd be willing, just naturally as you go to your hospital, to just take along some literature with you and check that it's put in a place that other patients can find it, then let Nicola know your name and address details, and obviously she can make sure you... Sorry, Nicola's going to say something as well now.
Debbie has got the list on the main desk, so if you want to leave your name and your email address as you leave today, that would be brilliant. And if you want to take a big batch of leaflets with you, just let us know which hospital you're going to take them to and how many leaflets you've taken. That would be an enormous help. Thank you.
Right, next one. So I thought this cartoon was quite amusing, seeing as we're press ganging you into taking this literature. It says, I wouldn't have even be here if my support group hadn't beaten me up. So, right, so in terms of other things, not to obviously drag it on too long and bore you to death, but obviously, as Emma mentioned, we're in the process of updating or starting to look at updating our websites, and obviously that will involve some redesign. And ideally moving it so that the GIST Support UK and the Paul's GIST Clinic websites can kind of be connected a bit more effectively than they are at the moment. One suggestion I think that was made by Dr. Leahy was that, in terms of the information we have on there, perhaps we ought to incorporate a section for GPs and doctors. Good idea. So, if any of you, by using our website, have actually had something really standing out that makes you think, well, they haven't got that, and you want to mention it, now's the time, because we can incorporate it into any new design. So if you do have any thoughts, do let us know. Are there any that immediately spring to mind now? Yeah, you can write them on the form, obviously. Our next GIST Support UK meeting, as I mentioned, we've organised it for Southampton. We've never been that far south with any of our meetings, so obviously we're hoping to make contact with patients down there, and obviously we'll be engaging with the medical professionals in that area that specialise in GIST. There was some discussion a while back also, almost verging on a bit of a complaint from Scottish patients saying, well, you know, you've never been up to Scotland, what about us? So we're in the process of organising a Scottish-based GIST Support UK meeting, which we're hoping will happen in December. Nick and David are going to go up to, because they have 4, I think it is, specialist sarcoma meetings each year in different parts of Scotland. So they're going to be going to the next one really to sort of beat the drum and let people know that we will be there in December, so that we make sure we make contact with as many doctors and patients so that they're aware we're going to be there in December. In terms of our list of all the major GIST specialists, obviously we have a list, but there are new people coming through all the time, and obviously there are doctors that are retiring. So that's something which we're keen to make sure we develop further, so that we have the best list of people. And we're trying to develop our trustee skill base. As we've mentioned, we've got some really brilliant help with fundraising, we've got some fantastic assistance with distribution and awareness raising. But internally, we are deficient in some areas. It would be really helpful if any of you knew of or had skills in IT or other skills that you think might be helpful in our situation and you wanted to offer them, then we'd be very grateful to hear from you. Obviously, all the work we do is only possible because of obviously committed trustees and volunteer supporters. So we've got our medical advisory board now, and obviously we continue to fundraise because we do have to afford things. And the only way we're going to get to a situation where we can actually be hopefully instrumental in getting research projects going is by being able to help at least part fund them, if not wholly fund them. So, getting boring now because I'm going over the same ground, but I'll be quick. The overall aim is raising awareness about GIST. Obviously, the Paul's GIST project is ongoing. Our next clinic is the 17th of July. Our last clinic was last Friday. We had 5 patients came along. To date, we've had 27 patients who've benefited from the clinic. It is in its own right, in addition to offering the best possible sort of medical intervention in the country, collectively, all the patients that go there, all their data is actually the formation of a research project to try and get a data set of that type of patient together to see what patterns emerge and hopefully to get some trials going at some point in the future. In terms of our bank and mutational analysis, all of these are things that we've been working on for some while. We have a bank, we want to develop it. We wish that mutational analysis becomes a standard in this country. I expect many of you know you've got GIST, and there will be quite a high proportion that don't know what type of GIST you have, and that's because mutational analysis isn't standard. But as time progresses, it will be identified that there are specific treatments that are specifically beneficial, so mutational analysis has to become the way forward. So thank you all very much for your attention and your support. We really appreciate the fact that you're here, wanting to participate in what we're doing. And as I say, if you'd like to join us in any capacity at all, we'd be very welcome. Thank you.
We've overrun a little bit, so no, I'm glad to. The information you just gave was vital. So, are there any questions that anybody has for us? I'm not
Well,
sure.
I the mutational analysis question and the skin and the tissue bank. When we first heard about it in Southampton, we also it was fresh tissue. Is historical tissue of any use, assuming we can access it?
Yes. What I would say is the bank is physical and virtual. So, for example, if you've got a tissue block and you manage to locate where it is, some patients have actually organised for their tissue block to be transferred to the bank. But it is also possible just to register the fact that it exists and where it exists, and you know, your name on it, so that if you register it centrally with the bank, should at some point in the future a researcher require access to that tissue, the bank knows where it is to be able to get it. So it doesn't have to all be physically transported to the bank, it can just be referenced there.
Thank you.
How do you find out where it went?
Well, generally, if you've had an operation, it's standard, and it's kept there for many years, it's standard for a block to be taken and preserved, and it will be in the pathology department, in storage, in the hospital where you had the operation, yes.
Mine was actually sent to Birmingham to
Right.
be analysed. I tried ringing after the last meeting to find out about it, to see about it going to the tissue bank. And
Yeah.
I just got passed from one place to another place to another place, and in the end I gave up.
Yeah. So all of it was sent to Birmingham, was it? Because usually what they would do is send, if it's for analysis, they'd send a sample, and it's uncommon for hospitals to be very willing to release all of it. So I would imagine there's still some in the original hospital. However, if it went to Birmingham, it would have probably gone to Dr. Philippe Tanier, and he has a collection, obviously, of GIST samples. So that's another example where his collection is referenced with the bank. But obviously, he's not about to transport it all to the bank. It stays where it is. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, right. I'd finally like to thank again our speakers today. Without them, these meetings wouldn't be anywhere near as informative as they are. So thank you to Sarah, to Mike, to Jane, and the other speakers that have said things today. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I'm not sure how many of you will see in Southampton. It's a bit further south. Southern softies, as somebody called me earlier when I came in feeling cold from being outside for a minute. But hopefully the sun will be shining. When is it? September? Yeah, October. All right, okay. So, and have a safe journey home, and we'll see you all again soon. Hang on, sorry, David. Thank you.
Yeah, there's tea and coffee for anybody.
Yeah, help yourself to tea and coffee. We've got this area for another hour or so, so help yourself. And please, take some literature with you. It's going to be out there. Help yourselves. Just put a note of your name and what you've had. Thank you very much.